Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. We're going to talk this morning about something that is very difficult for most of us to do, and that is to practice the act of forgiveness throughout our lives to all of those who have harmed us. Peter came to Jesus and he asked, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother who has sinned against me? Up to 7 times?" And Jesus answered, "I tell you not 7 times, but 70 times 7. That's a hard preaching. That's a lot of forgiveness. 70 times 7. I kind of like this one a little bit better. There was a villager said to a monk, "My neighbor slapped me. Should I forgive him?" And the monk said, "Yes, you ought to forgive him." "Well, how many times should I forgive my neighbor?" And the little monk says, "Well, how many times did he slap you?" And he says, "Well, once." And he says, "Well, then forgive him once. But if he slaps me 50 times, how many times should I forgive him?" And the little monk says, "Well, then you should forgive him 49 times. "Why only 49 times if I was struck 50 times, he asked the little monk. And the monk said, "Well, just freely accept the 50th slap. You deserve it for being such a fool to allow yourself to be slapped 49 times. Jesus got a different answer than that. He says 70 times 7. That's a hard teaching. That's a lot of forgiveness. And it raises the question, do I keep on forgiving someone who continues to hurt me over and over again? Guess the answer is yes. Jesus says 70 times 7 for each time. But that does not mean that I should subject myself to continuing abuse from somebody who keeps hurting me time after time. You see, there are wives who ought to get away from abusive husbands. There are husbands who ought to get away from abusive wives. There are children who should leave abusive parents. And there are parents who should cut the cord with children who continue to hurt them over and over again. You see, Jesus is not advocating a destructive codependency, but he is advocating a proactive policy of forgiving, a policy of forgiveness that can take a lot out of human hurt and improve human relationships. You know, sometimes we forgive simply because it is healthy for our own mind, our own body, and for our own spirit. In other words, it's just good for us to forgive. Good things happen. Because, you know, it's hard to keep hating somebody. It's hard to keep resenting somebody. It's hard to keep despising somebody all of the time. It takes a terrible toll on us as individuals. It's kind of like a little boy was sitting on a park bench, and he was obviously in terrible, terrible agony. A man walking by saw the little boy in all his agony, and he asked the boy, he says, "What's wrong?" And the boy said, "Well, I'm sitting on a bumblebee." "Well, then why don't you get up?" the man asked. "Because I really figure I'm hurting him more than I'm hurting me." The healing process doesn't begin until you get up off of the park bench. It takes a toll when we hold on to a grudge. You know, there was an interesting study conducted in 1994 by the Gallup organization. In this study, Philadelphia, the city of Philadelphia, ranked first among United cities on an index they call the Hostility Index. The Hostility Index was based on a questionnaire of 9 questions that researchers would ask people, questions relating to how they felt about rock music, supermarket checkout lines, and traffic jams. And I would guess any 3 of those would get our hostility rising just a wee bit. Other cities on this hostility index in the top 5 were New York, Cleveland, Chicago, and Detroit. But you know, it's interesting that New York City has a much higher death rate than the average from coronary disease. The medical experts look at these results of this hostility index study, and they say that it's no coincidence that the cities that rated high in the hostility index also rate very high in coronary death rate at earlier ages. As he commented on the study, Dr. Redford Williams of Duke University Medical School said, "Anger kills. There is a strong correlation between hostility and early death rates. The angrier people are and the more cynical that they are, the shorter their lifespan." Dr. Robert Kopp has a unique way of putting that. He says, "Grudge holders are grave diggers. The only problem is they dig their own graves." John Huffman says, "The world's most miserable person is that person who will not forgive. Nothing can gnarl the soul more quickly," he says. And he says, it's been said so aptly, if I had an enemy and I wanted to punish that person, I would teach them to hate. Resentment and hatred are useless, black, dark feelings, and usually they do more harm to us than they do to the person that we hate or we resent. So the first reason we forgive is because it's good for us. It's good for our mind. It's good for our body. It's good for our spirit. Another reason we forgive is because Christ told us to. And we say we are anyway, followers of Jesus Christ. And sometimes it's a little difficult to tell the difference between Christians and other people in society. But in the area of forgiveness is one place we certainly ought to be different. We should be forgivers. As followers of Christ, we not only forgive because it's to our benefit, but we do so because the Christ that we follow tells us to. Remember his example. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. But there is another pretty darn good reason we ought to forgive. And that is we forgive because we have been forgiven. We recited the Lord's Prayer in worship this morning, as we do every Sunday in worship. And I strongly suspect that many of us say the Lord's Prayer several times during the week. And there's a significant word, a very significant word in that prayer. It may be one of the more significant words we need to remember in any prayer we pray as Christians. That is the word as. Short little word, 2 letters, A-S. How important it is. You see, we ask to be forgiven, and we ask to be forgiven by those we have wronged as we have forgiven them. The word as in this case simply means in the same manner.